It's like, okay, that's the Democrats. Well, why do they need a political voice? Well, to keep the hierarchy from degenerating into rigid tyranny. It's part of the political discussion. But now the problem is this is the problem with the left, is that, well, what's the hierarchy? It's a tyrannical patriarchy. It's like, no, it's not. It's partly corrupt, like every system. But it's less corrupt than most systems, and there's a lot of elements of it that are devoted towards self-improvement and self-monitoring. You have to be a little nuanced and subtle about these sorts of things. And you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And the leftist rhetoric has got so intense that the idea is, and people believe this, well, the world is going to hell in a handbasket. Everything is getting worse in all possible ways, and there's systemic racism everywhere, and it's utterly unfair, and it should be torn down and rebuilt. It's like, no. It's actually functioning unbelievably well, even though it still has its problems. You know, and there's a big difference between saying there's systemic racism everywhere, and the reason that there isn't perfectly equal outcomes is because of prejudice, and saying, no, look, the system is functioning, let's say at 75%. It's doing all right. It's got some problems, including systemic prejudice, which hopefully will work themselves out across time and which show every bit of evidence of doing so. And so we don't need a radical solution. You know, and one of the things I've started to do with my Twitter account is to tweet out good, non-naive news. Because one of the things that's happening in the world, and there's been half a dozen books on this or more written in the last 5 years by credible people, is that the distribution of the idea of individual sovereignty and property rights and free market economies, etc., out into the rest of the world is making the non-Western world, is making the non-Western world rich really, really, really fast. So between 2000 and 2012, the rate of absolute poverty in the world fell by half. Half. It was the fastest period of economic development in human history. We beat the UN, we beat the optimistic UN target by 3 years. Staggering. You know, the rates of child mortality in Africa are now lower than they were in Europe in 1950. The fastest growing economies in the world are in sub-Saharan Africa. Millions of people a month are getting access to this incredible technology that's embodied in cell phones, right? People have access to fresh water like they've never had access before. The kids are getting immunized at a rate that's unprecedented, and yet we have this idea that's become rampant in the West that there's something ultimately corrupt about the patriarchal tyranny and that it has to be dismantled right down to its core. And a lot of that's being taught by the activist disciplines in universities, and I just don't get it. It's not acceptable.
So they see these hierarchies and their proposal to level everything off and to take away the insane power at the very top is equality of outcome. This unproven in terms of it's never been done successfully to a utopian.
Right. Well, I also don't even think you can do it in principle, because if you accept the proposition, the propositions I laid out, which is you have to pursue things of value, and if you pursue things of value in a social space, so you do it cooperatively and competitively, you do it with other people, then you're going to produce differential outcome because people will be differently good at it.
Yes.
Well, it's like, okay, you don't believe that? It's like, okay, do you listen to random selections of music online? Or do you do what everyone else does? You go for the 0.1% of songwriters, and you only listen to them. You only listen to you only read the productions of 0.1% of writers. You only listen to the podcasts of 0.1% of podcast broadcasters, right? When you watch sports on TV, you only watch the athletic contributions of 0.1% of athletes. So, like, where's the equality exactly? Where's that in your life? You people who are pushing for equality of outcome. You manifest that in anything you do? You don't. You're unbelievably selective, just like everyone else. And the reason you're selective is because there are things that are happening that need to happen or that are entertaining and interesting, and you want the best in all of those realms. That's how it works. And there is a best. That's the other thing that's so painful. And that actually is painful. You know, here's a problem of dispossession, a real problem. One way to not do very well in any hierarchy is to have a low IQ. And so IQ is normally distributed. And if you have an IQ of less than 85, it's hard for you to read well enough to follow instructions. That's about 10% of the population, might even be higher than that. Okay, so given that lack, how are you going to compete? And the answer is, you're not. Because low IQ is a good predictor of poverty. Now they spiral because, you know, if you're cognitively, if you're less cognitively gifted, then, and you have children, they're going to be in a less enriched environment. These things spiral, but you still have the essential problem. That's the essential problem of the dispossessed. It's like hierarchies are complex tools to attain necessary goals, but they dispossess people. What do we do with the people that they dispossess? The answer is, we don't know. So we have to talk about it constantly to figure out how to solve it, because it's an ongoing problem that transforms, and that's the reason that political dialogue is necessary. And then the danger is that the political dialogue will polarize into the radical left, no hierarchies whatsoever, or the radical right. Our hierarchy is 100% right at all costs. And so we have the eternal problem, and those are the two poles that we have to negotiate between.
It's interesting because the accusation has always been that what the left is trying to do with this equality of outcome thing is sort of an infantilization of the populace, right? And the best example of that is sports. When you look at sports, clearly the best people win, right? The fastest runners win the race. The people that have the best strategy win the game. The that's a weird word, infantilization, I never get it right, but of that is what we do with children, where you get participation trophies and no one wins. You know, when my daughter was 3 years old, she was in soccer, and they didn't keep score, but everyone knew. Everyone knew these kids scored, and they didn't. At the end of the game, they didn't announce a winner. There was
you can't have a soccer game without keeping score. Yeah, it's not a soccer game anymore. It's something else.
But the score was kept.
Of course.
It just wasn't discussed.
Well, of course.
It was the strangest thing. But this is to treat these little kids, because they couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
You know, she cried when the other team scored. I'm like, it feels bad when they score, so it feels good when you score. It's very difficult to say that to a 3-year-old.
Right.
So is she going to run hills? Is she going to practice drills so that she feels that good feeling more? And then there's a point where that becomes too far. There's a point where you become an obsessive over-winner, right? And this is the people that want to crush their enemies. Then you become Conan the Barbarian. This is the far end of it.
Okay,
and this is what the left is terrified of, right? The idea of the left is the demure, the soft, the people that are kinder and gentler. The idea of the right is the conqueror, the people that, you know, they work hard, play hard, go kick ass, go America, that kind of shit. And so these are the type of people that are going to be crueler. They're going to do what it takes to win. And the people that you would consider that would like equality of outcome are the people that are trying to slow that down. Does this make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's how it lays itself out temperamentally too.
Psychologically.
Yes.
This is the motivation for all this.
Yes. And it's, well, and the radical left is compassion gone mad, although it's also envy. Let's not forget about that. Because,
envy.
Well, absolutely.
Yes.
I mean, one reason to stand up for the dispossessed is because you're empathetic. You know, and empathy is not an automatic good. This is something we make a big mistake about. We think, well, I'm feeling sorry for you, therefore I'm good. It's like, no, I might be feeling too sorry for you. I might not be demanding enough of you. So, and that's the terrible devouring mother, you know, from a psychoanalytic perspective.
Yes.
Oh, everything you do, dear, is okay. It's like, no, it's not.
Right.
So one of the things that Jean Piaget, the developmental psychologist, he was very interested in figuring out a way out of this, and it's very much relevant to your concept, your talk about athletics. Okay, so imagine this. Because this is also something that points the way to a proper morality, which was actually something that Jean Piaget was very concerned about. He wanted to reconcile the distinction between religion and science. That's actually what drove him. Even though people don't know that, he was arguably the world's greatest developmental psychologist. So here's the idea. You know how you tell your kid to be a good sport? You say, it doesn't matter whether you win or lose, it matters how you play the game. Okay, so I've been unpacking that in my lectures because it's really, really complicated. It's like, you tell your kid that, and they look at you and they think, well, what do you mean by that? Aren't I supposed to try to win? It's a soccer game. I'm supposed to win. And you say, well, yeah, you're supposed to win, but it doesn't matter whether you win or lose. It matters how you play the game. You know that that's right, but you don't know how to explain it to your kid. You say, well, you want to be a good sport. Okay, so imagine this. This is how it works. And this is crucially important. So, first of all, life is not a game. Even a game is not a game. Because a game is, most of the time, a game is the beginning of a series of games. So let's say that you're on a soccer team. Well, there's winning the game, but the game isn't the issue. The game is the whole series of games. So maybe the game is winning the championship. And winning the championship and winning a game are not the same thing. And the reason for that is, well, maybe if you want to win a game, the best thing to do is to let your star player make all the moves. But if you want to win a championship, maybe the best thing is for your star player to do everything he or she possibly can to develop all the other team members. That's a different strategy. And the reason it's different is because it iterates across time. Okay, so I'll tell you a quick story. So when my kid was playing hockey, when he was about 12 or so, he was in a championship game, just at a local arena, you know. And it was really fun to watch. The teams were pretty equal, which is something that you want, so that everybody can expand their skills while they're playing. And it was like 5 seconds to the end of the game, and the other team made a breakaway and came down, and the guy came down the ice and scored. It was a beautiful goal, and it was 4-3, and that was the end of it, right? And on my kid's team, there was the kid who was the star, and he was a pretty good hockey player. He came off the ice, and he was very annoyed about what had happened. And he smashed his stick on the cement and was complaining about the refereeing and acting as if he'd been robbed. And his father came up, and instead of saying, "Get your act together, kid, that's no way to display yourself after a loss," he said, "Oh yeah, man, you were robbed, that the referees didn't ref right, and you played the best and you should have won." And I thought, you absolute son of a bitch, you're ruining your son. And then the question is why? Because his son was the star and was trying to win. Why was he ruining his son? Well, you're trying to train your son not to win the game. You're trying to train your son to win the championship. And so that's a series of games. But then life isn't the championship. Life is a whole bunch of championships. It's a whole sequence of them. And so what you're actually trying to train your son to do is to be a contender in the entire series. And the way you do that is by helping him develop his character. And the character is actually the strategy that would enable him to win the largest number of games across the largest possible span of time. And one way you do that if you're a kid is like, well, what do you want to do with your kid? You don't want to teach him to win. You want to teach him to play well with others. And that's to be reciprocal. So that means to try to win, but also to pay attention to developing the other people around him, and not to put winning the game above everything at all times. So then he's fun to play with. And this is absolutely crucial. You can help your kid become fun to play with between the ages of 2 and the age of 4. If your kid is fun to play with, then what happens? Kids line up to play with him. And adults line up to teach him. And if kids line up to play with him, then he'll have friends his whole life, and he'll be socialized, and he'll be invited to many games, some of which he'll win, all of which he'll be able to participate in. And if he's fun to play with, then adults will teach him things, and then he wins at life. And so when you say to your kid, it doesn't matter whether you win or lose, it matters how you play the game, what you're saying is, don't forget, kid, that what you're trying to do here is to do well at life. And you need to practice the strategies that enable you to do well at life while you're in any specific game. And you never want to compromise your ability to do well at life for the sake of winning a single game. And there's a deep ethic in that, and it's the ethic of reciprocity in games. Part of the reason that we're so obsessed with sports is because we like to see that dramatized, you know, like the person we really admire as an athlete isn't only the person who wins. We don't like the narcissistic winners. They're winners, and that's a plus. But if they're narcissistic, they're not good team players, they're only out for themselves, then we think, well, you're a winner in the narrow sense, but your character is suspect. You're no role model, even though you're a winner. And it's because we're looking for something deeper. We're looking for that, the manifestation of character that allows you to win across the set of possible games. And that's a real thing. That's a real ethic. It's a fundamental ethic.
I think what you're pointing out that's very important is we're searching for the person who's got it all nailed. Someone who tries their hardest but is also honest enough about the circumstances to not cry foul when it's gone the other person's way.
Yeah, well,